I would say, like myself a year ago, we mightn't have had as many people in this room. Nick made a good point. I've been working on this for 10 years in the feed industry in general, and really many of us knew about something around carbon footprinting. We were hearing of a climate change. David Attenborough was telling us everything that was going on in climate change, but really were we aware of how quickly it would move? A year ago, I didn't know what LFA or LCAs were. It was another TLA, a three-letter abbreviation. And there are so many TLAs out there now. But now, you know, I've started to understand at least some of them. I think from this point of view, I want to look at it more from maybe the local side of things and some of the challenges that we are seeing both with Trow and with the industry in general. But in my opinion, what I've looked at for the last year or year and a half, we have a train. We have a train coming. And the problem, to some extent, is that none of us have been driving that train. We haven't really even been involved in an understanding of where the train's going. So as said earlier, we're maybe coming to this as latter day, jumping on at some point. But the train is coming, and we will be expected to be on board at some level at some point in the future. Some are much more involved in that journey at the moment, and others are looking at it and thinking, can I hear a whistle? Is there something? And we're not quite there yet. So in looking at this from the challenges that we're seeing, we can divide them into various groups, but really the four that we're looking at here are in terms of the whole climate change issues that we're seeing. It's greenhouse gases, it's nitrogen, it's deforestation, all the things we've talked about, circularity, but others that we're seeing as well around animal health, animal welfare, antibiotic use. They're also key there, and we've maybe been somewhat blindsided by the other, let's call it, parts of sustainability, because we have seen so much activity around the animal welfare side and antibiotics, and even feed and food safety are keys to it. So those are things that are now front and centre for where we are as an industry. Others have maybe been up front on the footprint of this train for quite a while. And they've been dictating to some extent where the train will be going. Keep this train analogy going as long as we can here. But we look at the likes of Tesco's and across Europe, Carrefour and Lidl as well, and they have all set themselves certain targets. Whether those targets are quite close, we see some talking about 2026 and being in terms of science-based targets fully aligned for what they're doing. And then others like Tesco are saying, well, we'll have a 35% reduction by 2035. Do we know what those will really mean? Do Tesco, for example, know what it is they're expecting? Again, closed room. I can be cynical. We had a conversation on the poultry side with a retailer fairly recently, and they openly admitted that to them sustainability is important. We're saving the planet, but we're also getting more of our footfall across the door. So it's a commercial enterprise for a lot of the people who are in the front of the train at the moment, and those people, I suppose, are also impacting strongly on those who we are supplying. If we look at it from, let's say, the next level down, we have those folk that are buying the product from the people we are feeding. So whether it's the milk, the dairy farmer, the pig producer, the egg producer, you have many people then in this processor market who are now also having to tap into what's happening. And so we see people like Nestle putting a figure in there. Friesland Campina, our Dutch colleague, will know well where they're setting their standards. And there's a 1.4 cents they're talking about now if you can reduce your carbon footprint from 1.2, 1.25 down towards 1. And they're setting certain things in place that will allow you to get towards that. But first of all, you have to have a benchmark. You have to have somewhere where you're starting from. And I would be somewhat concerned that some of the figures that are being thrown out there at the moment are maybe not quite what they seem to be. Again, not quite knowing why Tesco can put 800 grams of CO2 per pint by the Carbon Trust. Where does the figure come from? Do we know? No, again, it's one of those things. So I'm just bringing a dose of reality to some extent, in that where we are is the start of a journey. And what we need to be doing is getting more understanding of how we can understand, as Nick has said, and as Muriel has reaffirmed with a lot of detail there, how we get information that we can all use and we can all be on the same page. Because I think if we do all go off on our own directions and try to do everything ourselves, we'll end up with an eaten mess. It'll be very difficult to bring it back. In terms of the challenges I see in the industry here, well, first of all, we have this demand. It's coming. We know already. I sat with an egg producer recently who asked the question, how can we get a footprint per kilo of egg? Because our retail customers are asking. So that's already there. The current farm models, and I don't want to be disingenuous to our government bodies, but coming from the north, I know that the standard model that's being used at the moment is an excellent model, but they have one dairy feed. So they're doing an assessment around farms, and the LCA that they work on, all the data that they collect is excellent. But the feed input they put in has one footprint on it. So I think we as an industry need to be standing up and say, well, look, that one won't suit every situation. What's the protein level? What are the raw material base? We don't know. Thirdly, compound feed companies, and many represented here, will need to have up-to-date information. It's no point looking at information that's been there for 4 or 5 years. Let's get the most recent information and work with that. The other side is resources. And when I look at the database as Muriel presents it there, there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of variations also on a theme. And unless you, as a feed compounder, have maybe employed someone full-time to work on that will be difficult to dip in and out of, and to stay consistent and also to stay up to date. So it is something we'll have to try and manage. The raw materials themselves, and we've had this just recent, that debate there just now, we need to have more regional data. We have to be able to show that the footprints that we can bring raw materials from are not all the same. Country specific, I think, is a very broad brush, and we need to be aware that and I think it's a good positive point that there can be potential change for branded within that. And finally, certainly some feed mills will want to distinguish themselves or differentiate themselves from others, and maybe want to be ahead of the game, or also those linked to feed processors, etc., or milk processors will maybe have more desire to move more quickly, so that there will be opportunities for some. What I would say is that the folk that are involved in this will be, firstly, nutritionists and formulators. Those people who are dealing with the information day in and day out. Those who are having to formulate feeds. And it's not just a case of saying, well, dairy feed is dairy feed, because, again, it's not. Then the second group that will be influenced are the decision-making units within companies. So we have maybe a sustainability manager, product managers, they're purchasing folk. What should we be buying? Who should we be buying it off? A lot of our trade bodies are represented here as well today. And we're not all running away to buy a single source. The supply chain is very well established here. And it's a good supply chain. We have a lot of raw materials that have been well established. And I think the thing that personally I get a wee bit concerned about with footprinting is that the emphasis will move to some extent from the nutritional quality of the material to the footprint of the material. And in my book, efficiency is the thing that drives reduction in carbon footprint. So if we can have a more efficient system, a more efficient production, especially in the likes of our dairy sector, there's so much room for improving the production of milk and reducing our footprint there, rather than getting all our eggs, forgive the pun, in the basket of sustainability, or at least in terms of raw materials. And finally then we have our stakeholders in marketing and customers. They have to be taken into account as well. So there's a few things there that we have looked on as a company, and on the back of that, we set first of all the PEFCR guidelines as has been talked about. That's where we have looked at it, and within the Nutraco organisation, Nutraco being the fish side on one side and the land animal side being the trow end. So those all coming together under the one umbrella. Agreed, PEFCR is the best set of metrics to develop from. We put our own people in place internally, and they're the boffins that understand that database. And then what we liked about GFLI was this continuous potential for update. And so we wanted to build that into our tools. And so we across Europe use BestMix. A lot of mills here will use Format, Brill, Ultramix, whatever other formulation package is out there. Those can all then be used to bring your data into a place where you can then use either optimization or just calculation of a formula. So you can work with that. But that, again, takes time and takes people to continually keep loading information. As this has already been covered, but again, from what we need to get to is the secondary data, which we're coming with our raw materials, then bringing in the inbound transport, finally adding the mill data beyond that. So already been covered by Nick, and indeed we have got the same slide. So to reinforce the point, pulled this one in because from our point of view, this is to some extent where we haven't got lots of local information. In many cases we have, and those thousands of acres of grain in Ireland that are net zero, grown by leprechauns, those are the ones that we know we all want to move to. But the few million tonne of feed in Ireland can't really all be grown here. So we will have to import a certain amount of it. That also then looks at transport. But here's the key part. This is the bit that you guys have in your hands. The importance of the feed mill itself, the systems that you're using within the mill and the impact that those have. As Nick said, it's not a huge part in the overall scheme of things, but it can be relatively important. The important bit I highlight here is the nutritional analysis. Because again, we don't want to get away from feeding the animal the best diet we can just because we want a lower footprint. Don't ever forget that point. And then eventually we will get to the point where we are already there now with models that take it right out to farm and utilise the data right through to the end product. In terms of trout nutrition, Nutraco, we set GFLI at the top of the list. This isn't for this meeting. This slide was done a year ago. And we have looked at GFLI across the board as our main information data supplier. It's just one of those things. We have prioritised that as the go-to for our secondary LCA data. Others, like SEMAPro, are also there, but again, based also on GFLI data. But others come in for ingredients, like 15,000 ingredients, or 1,500 ingredients, apologies, that are there at the moment. Well, there are some that aren't there, and especially on the micronutrient side. And as a premix house and a feed additive supplier, we haven't got all of those in GFLI. So therefore, we look to the likes of AgriBallast. EcoInvent gives us a lot of the transportation and energy information. And if we can't find any of it anywhere, we go and take a look at the World Food LCA database. The one thing we will always try to do is apply the same metrics right down the chain. So the PEF-CR requirements have to be fulfilled by each of those, or we have to reset it and apply the same metrics. So again, why GFLI? Well, it's what the European Commission are advising. Has everyone read the? If I just pick it up, sorry, John. The latest draft. How many people have read the FIFAC draft? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's always one somewhere. There has to be one somewhere. Yeah, get that man a life. Well, I've been through it and highlighted some parts of it, over the last while, and trying to get my head around all those acronyms. But it does reference GFLI in there, because again, it's a database that's useful to buy into. But the key to it is following the PEF-CR guidelines. FIFAC have already said that GFLI have developed the rules, or developed their product in line with the rules, and then there's the potential for regular updates. That's going to be key going forward. And again, this whole discussion around, whether South American versus North American, or French versus German, or Ukrainian no longer available. Yeah, those things will eventually spill out. And there will be a trend, a move towards certain things. But I think, first of all, we want to benchmark where we are now. We've got a supply chain in place. Let's use that supply chain and benchmark what we have. And then within that supply chain, be able to reformulate, to make adjustments where possible. So again, we're doing work at the moment on dairy cow nitrogen efficiency. A conversion of protein to milk protein in the dairy cow averages somewhere around 28%. Why can we not get 30? Why can we not get 35? Is 40 possible? Can we do it with the ingredients we have at the moment? Probably. So are we looking at 17, 18% protein diets? Or are we looking at 15 and 15.5 protein diets producing the amount of milk that we can now do? From a nutritional point of view, yes, it can be done. So we need to look at the efficiencies within the cow. Regular updates, GFLI can develop more regional, as we've talked about, branded, and it can also add specific footprints in if you have data that, again, can be stood over. The data has to have the same methodology. So that brings us to, I suppose, the possibilities going forward. If you have the ability within your company to mine that data and continually mine updates, I would say yes, get out there and do it. If you haven't, there are models, and I'm not being commercial about this, but we've been developing them as well. But there are models available that you can shortcut the system to some extent by having somebody else do all the data mining for you. Very briefly, just a couple of screenshot slides. If you take this particular model, these are the raw materials that we've been bringing in. But apologies to the cameraman for jumping about. You say, for example, maize. Well, we can pick maize from various countries. In this case, we picked it from Canada. You can either have a default distance travelled, which is a general average around the world, or you can be specific. If you know your maize from Canada is coming, I think I have some, you can't see the numbers, but on here it says a diesel freight train 1,000 kilometres. So it comes across Canada from the prairies 1,000 kilometres maybe to Hamilton. And then it comes down the St. Lawrence Seaway on a bulk container. And it's roughly, someone give me the number, 5,000 kilometres across from Canada to here, maybe a wee bit more. And then you have the local transport from Dublin out to your mill, another 100 kilometres. That's giving you your number for that raw material into your feed mill. When you build your own wee database, apologies, skip that. When you build your own database, you load it all in so that it's your raw materials for your feed mill. And then you can add your own feed mill data. So whether you're using, we mentioned it earlier, diesel, electricity, natural gas, whether you've got a windmill, those can all be footprinted for the ton of feed produced in your mill. And everyone, as we said earlier, Nick mentioned, everyone has the costs that are built in there. And finally, you then take your formulation and you build your formulation in with the data for each raw material that you already have. And so you come up with a footprint for the ton of feed or the kilo of feed, which then could go to the farmer and help them fill in the LCA information that they need from government or whatever. So that was a sort of a short version on a few, let's say, hobby horse chats as well. But we're at the beginning of a journey. Some was a little further on than others. I do appreciate that this has been a very useful exercise. You know, the folk here have shown a lot of interest, especially to the understanding of the information. Going by the questions, there's a lot of deep thinkers in this room. I'm glad we have people over here that understand the answers. But thank you for listening.